1965. As U.S. ground troops poured into South Vietnam, Washington sought a solution from the skies. A sustained bombing campaign designed to break the will of North Vietnam, halt the flow of supplies, and secure victory from above. Today, we explore Operation Rolling Thunder, the longest aerial bombardment in history. A campaign of unprecedented scale, yet crippled by political micromanagement, a tenacious enemy, and the brutal reality that willpower often triumphs over technology. This is the air war that defined a generation. This is Operation Rolling Thunder. From March 1965 to October 1968, the skies over North Vietnam became a proving ground for American air power and a graveyard for American illusions. Operation Rolling Thunder was the longest sustained bombing campaign in U.S. history up to that point. 3.5 years of relentless airstrikes designed to break an enemy's will, halt their supply lines, and force them to the negotiating table. It failed at all three. This is the story of how the most technologically advanced air force in the world, wielding supersonic jets, precision-guided munitions, and overwhelming firepower, was defeated not by superior technology, but by political constraints, strategic confusion, and the unwavering determination of an enemy who refused to break. To understand Rolling Thunder, we must first understand the crisis that created it. By early 1965, South Vietnam was collapsing. The government in Saigon was in chaos. Coups followed coups. The Army of the Republic of Vietnam, ARVN, was losing ground to the Viet Cong insurgency. Villages fell. Roads were cut. The countryside belonged to the enemy. And behind the Viet Cong stood North Vietnam, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, DRV, led by Ho Chi Minh and his Politburo. From Hanoi, men and supplies flowed south along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a vast network of jungle paths running through Laos and Cambodia. The trail was the lifeline of the insurgency, and it was growing stronger every month. President Lyndon Baines Johnson faced an impossible choice: commit American combat troops to Vietnam, a ground war in Asia that could spiral out of control, or watch South Vietnam fall to communism, triggering a political catastrophe at home and emboldening communist movements worldwide. Johnson chose a middle path. He would use air power. The theory was seductive. Modern air power could do what ground forces could not: strike deep into enemy territory without the political cost of American casualties on the ground. Bombs could destroy infrastructure, interdict supply lines, and inflict pain directly on the North Vietnamese leadership. If the bombing was calibrated correctly, gradually increased to apply pressure without triggering Chinese or Soviet intervention, it could compel Hanoi to negotiate. Operation Rolling Thunder was officially launched on March 2, 1965, following a Viet Cong attack on the U.S. airbase at Pleiku that killed 8 Americans. The operation had 3 primary objectives. First, boost South Vietnamese morale by demonstrating American commitment and punishing the North. Second, halt or significantly reduce the infiltration of men and supplies into South Vietnam via the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Third, compel the Democratic Republic of Vietnam to cease its support for the Viet Cong and come to the negotiating table on terms favorable to the United States. These objectives were not just ambitious. They were contradictory. The initial strikes were limited, armed reconnaissance missions against military targets in the southern panhandle of North Vietnam. Bridges, supply depots, radar stations. The tonnage was carefully calibrated. The targets were approved personally by President Johnson and his inner circle in Washington. This was the doctrine of graduated response, the belief that by slowly increasing pressure, the U.S. could signal resolve while maintaining control over the escalation ladder. Apply pain. Wait for a response. Apply more pain if necessary. The architects of this strategy were civilians: President Johnson and his Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, a former Ford Motor Company executive who believed war could be managed like a corporation, with metrics, systems analysis, and rational cost-benefit calculations. McNamara and his team of Pentagon analysts, derisively called the Whiz Kids, believed the DRV would behave like a rational actor. They would calculate the costs of continued resistance, compare them to the benefits of peace, and choose negotiation. After all, how much punishment could a small, agricultural nation endure? But this assumption was catastrophically wrong. Because Hanoi was not fighting a cost-benefit analysis. They were fighting a revolutionary war, a struggle for national survival and reunification that had already lasted 20 years against the French and would continue for as long as necessary. And so Rolling Thunder began, not with a thunderclap, but with a whimper. Limited strikes, restrictive rules of engagement, and above all, political micromanagement from Washington that would cripple the campaign from the start. Every Tuesday, Johnson and McNamara personally selected bombing targets in the White House basement. Tuesday lunch meetings where politicians, not generals, decided which bridges to hit, which roads to strike, and which targets were off-limits. Critical targets, the port of Haiphong, where Soviet ships unloaded weapons and supplies. Key bridges in Hanoi, North Vietnamese airfields where MiG fighters were based, remained untouchable for months, even years. The reason? Fear of provoking China or the Soviet Union. Fear of escalation. Fear of World War III. The result was a campaign without coherence, a strategic muddle that would cost hundreds of American lives and billions of dollars while achieving nothing. The planes were about to fly. The bombs were about to fall. And the North Vietnamese were about to teach the United States a lesson about the limits of air power. The primary target of Rolling Thunder was not, initially, North Vietnam's industrial capacity or urban centers. It was the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the vast, sprawling logistics network that carried men, weapons, ammunition, and supplies from North Vietnam through Laos and Cambodia into South Vietnam. The trail was not a single road. It was a living, evolving organism. Hundreds of paths, dirt roads, waterways, and rest stations spread across thousands of square miles of triple canopy jungle and karst mountain terrain. Supplies moved by truck where roads existed, by bicycle and porter when they didn't. Rest stations, hidden beneath the jungle canopy, provided shelter and repair facilities. Interdicting the trail, cutting the flow of supplies, became an obsession for American war planners. If the trail could be severed, the Viet Cong insurgency in the south would wither from lack of supplies. The war could be won without invading North Vietnam. It was a logical theory. It was also impossible. The U.S. Air Force and Navy threw enormous resources at the trail. F-105 Thunder Chiefs, the workhorse of Rolling Thunder, screamed over Laos and North Vietnam at low altitude, dropping bombs on suspected truck parks, bridges, and supply depots. F-4 Phantom IIs, fast and versatile, flew fighter escort and ground attack missions. B-52 Stratofortresses, designed to drop nuclear weapons on Soviet cities, were repurposed to carpet bomb sections of jungle. The ordnance evolved constantly. Iron bombs, unguided, cheap, and plentiful, rained down by the thousands. Cluster bombs scattered hundreds of bomblets across wide areas, designed to shred trucks and personnel. Napalm turned jungle into infernos. Later in the campaign, laser-guided bombs promised precision, the ability to drop a bridge with a single strike instead of dozens. Sensors were dropped along the trail, acoustic detectors that listened for truck engines, seismic sensors that felt vibrations. Data was analyzed by computers in Thailand. Strike packages were launched within hours of detection. The U.S. military was waging the most technologically sophisticated air campaign in history. And the North Vietnamese simply adapted. The DRV's response to rolling thunder was not technological, it was human. The trail became redundant, with multiple parallel routes. When a bridge was destroyed, engineers built a ford or a pontoon crossing. When a road was cratered, labor battalions filled it overnight. When trucks were destroyed, bicycles carried the loads. When the bicycles were destroyed, porters carried the loads on their backs. Tens of thousands of North Vietnamese, soldiers, civilian volunteers, even teenagers, worked on the trail. They moved at night, when American aircraft had limited visibility. They hid under the jungle canopy during the day, camouflaging supply dumps and truck parks with foliage that was replaced daily. Entire sections of road were covered with interwoven bamboo mats that allowed vehicles to pass beneath, but appeared as solid jungle from the air. And the supplies kept flowing. In 1965, an estimated 35,000 tons of supplies moved down the trail. By 1967, despite years of intensive bombing, that number had increased to over 60,000 tons. The North Vietnamese were not just enduring the bombing, they were winning the logistics war. Part of the failure was technological. Bombing jungle targets from 20,000 feet at 600 miles per hour was inherently imprecise. Pilots dropped their ordnance and climbed away, rarely seeing the results. Bomb damage assessment was guesswork. Trucks destroyed on one day often reappeared on the next intelligence report. But the greater failure was strategic, and it stemmed from Washington. Critical targets that could have crippled North Vietnam's ability to sustain the war remained off-limits due to political constraints. The port of Haiphong, where Soviet cargo ships unloaded missiles, ammunition, petroleum, and supplies, was not bombed until 1967, and even then, only under strict conditions that prevented hits on the actual docks where foreign ships moored. The fear was clear: sink a Soviet ship, and the Cold War could escalate catastrophically. Johnson and McNamara were terrified of triggering Soviet or Chinese intervention, repeating the nightmare of the Korean War when Chinese troops poured across the Yalu River. So Haiphong remained open. Soviet ships unloaded their cargoes unmolested, and the supplies moved south. Airfields near Hanoi, where North Vietnamese MiG-17 and MiG-21 fighters were based, remained off-limits for much of the campaign. American pilots watched helplessly as MiGs took off, attacked them, and landed back at bases they were forbidden to strike. Rail lines from China were struck sporadically but never systematically cut, allowing trains loaded with weapons and supplies to roll into North Vietnam unimpeded. The oil storage facilities near Hanoi and Haiphong, critical to North Vietnam's transportation infrastructure, were not targeted until June 1966, more than a year into the campaign. When they were finally struck, they burned for weeks. But by then, the DRV had dispersed its petroleum reserves into thousands of small caches, hidden in villages and jungle clearings. The strategic impact was minimal. American military commanders, Air Force generals, and Navy admirals watched in fury as their aircraft and pilots were squandered on insignificant targets while the truly strategic objectives remained protected by political decree. They pleaded for permission to strike Haiphong, to mine the harbors, to destroy the MiG bases. The answer from Washington was always the same: no. Too dangerous. Too escalatory. Continue graduated response. And so the bombs fell. And the supplies kept moving. And the air crews kept dying. If the war on the ground was a quagmire, the war in the air over North Vietnam was a gauntlet of fire and steel. By late 1965, North Vietnam had constructed one of the most formidable air defense systems in the world, not through indigenous technology, but through massive military aid from the Soviet Union and China. Moscow and Beijing, locked in their own ideological rivalry, competed to supply Hanoi with the weapons and expertise needed to lead the American air campaign. The result was a layered, integrated defense that turned North Vietnamese airspace into a killing zone. The first layer was anti-aircraft artillery, AAA. Thousands of guns ranging from small-caliber machine guns to heavy 85mm and 100mm cannons. These guns formed a dense network around cities, bridges, supply depots, and other key targets. When American aircraft approached, the sky filled with black clouds of shrapnel that could tear a jet apart. AAA was crude but devastatingly effective. Pilots had to fly low to acquire targets, bringing them within range. The North Vietnamese learned to concentrate their fire, creating curtains of flak that forced pilots to choose between abandoning their attack or flying through certain death. AAA accounted for more than 85% of all U.S. aircraft losses during Rolling Thunder. The second layer was the SA-2 Guideline Surface-to-Air Missile, a Soviet-designed SAM system that revolutionized air defense. The SA-2 was a radar-guided missile capable of reaching altitudes of 60,000 feet and traveling at over Mach 3. It could engage aircraft far beyond the range of conventional AAA. The first SA-2 site became operational in North Vietnam in April 1965, just weeks after Rolling Thunder began. On July 24, 1965, an SA-2 shot down an American F-4 Phantom, the first of hundreds. The missiles were terrifying. Pilots described them as flying telephone poles, massive white contrails streaking upward at impossible speeds. If a SAM locked onto you, your options were limited. Dive for the ground, deploy chaff to confuse the radar, or pray. The U.S. responded with Wild Weasel missions, dedicated aircraft flown by volunteer crews whose job was suppression of enemy air defenses, SEAD. These pilots deliberately provoked SAM sites to fire, then attacked the radar installations with anti-radiation missiles like the AGM-45 Shrike. It was one of the most dangerous jobs in the war. Wild Weasel crews had a saying, "First in, last out." They entered hostile airspace ahead of the strike package to clear the SAMs, and they left only after everyone else was safe. The third layer was MiG fighters, Soviet-built MiG-17s, subsonic but highly maneuverable, and MiG-21s, supersonic interceptors capable of hit-and-run attacks. North Vietnamese pilots, trained by Soviet and Chinese advisors, employed tactics designed to exploit American weaknesses. MiGs would wait until American strike aircraft were loaded with bombs and low on fuel, then attack at high speed, forcing the Americans to jettison their ordnance and engage. Even if the MiGs didn't shoot anyone down, they disrupted the mission. And if they did score kills, they retreated to their bases. Bases American pilots were often forbidden to attack. Air-to-air combat over North Vietnam was brutal and often surreal. U.S. pilots flew F-4 Phantoms, powerful and fast but originally designed without an internal gun, a decision based on the mistaken belief that missiles had made dogfighting obsolete. Early AIM-7 Sparrow and AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles were unreliable, often failing to track or detonate. American pilots found themselves in close-range turning fights against more agile MiG-17s, armed only with temperamental missiles. It wasn't until later in the war that an internal gun pod was added to the F-4. The North Vietnamese exploited every advantage. They used ground-controlled intercept radar to vector MiGs toward American formations. They hid aircraft in revetments and caves. They baited American pilots into flying over concentrations of AAA and SAMs. And American pilots kept dying. By 1967, over 500 U.S. aircraft had been lost over North Vietnam. Hundreds of pilots were dead. Hundreds more had been captured, shot down, ejected, and taken prisoner by North Vietnamese forces. These prisoners of war were taken to Ho Lo prison in Hanoi, sarcastically nicknamed the Hanoi Hilton by the Americans held there. Conditions were brutal. Prisoners were tortured, beaten, starved, placed in stress positions, subjected to psychological torment. The North Vietnamese wanted propaganda confessions, statements denouncing American war crimes. Many resisted. Some broke. All suffered. Men like John McCain, shot down in October 1967, would spend years in captivity, enduring unimaginable abuse. Back in Washington, the mounting losses forced a reassessment, not of the strategy, but of the tactics. More aircraft were assigned to SAD missions. Strike packages grew larger and more complex, F-105s carrying bombs, F-4s flying escort, Wild Weasels suppressing SAMs, EB-66 electronic warfare aircraft jamming radars, tankers orbiting offshore to refuel returning aircraft. A single strike on a heavily defended target could involve 50 or more aircraft. The planning was meticulous. The execution was dangerous. And the results were often disappointing. Bridges repaired within days, supply depots rebuilt, truck traffic resuming. By late 1967, some of the political restrictions began to lift. Targets closer to Hanoi and Haiphong were authorized. The Paul Doumer Bridge in Hanoi, a critical rail link, was finally struck in August 1967 and destroyed with the new laser-guided bombs. The port facilities at Haiphong were hit, though mining the harbor remained forbidden. But it was too late. The restrictions had allowed North Vietnam to build its defenses, disperse its industry, and adapt its logistics. The damage inflicted, while significant, was never decisive, and the cost kept climbing. By October 1968, when Rolling Thunder finally ended, over 900 U.S. aircraft had been lost, shot down by SAMs, AAA, or MiGs, or lost to accidents and mechanical failures in the harsh operational environment. Over 800 American airmen were dead or prisoners of war. And North Vietnam was still fighting. On October 31, 1968, President Lyndon Johnson announced a halt to all bombing of North Vietnam. Operation Rolling Thunder, after 3.5 years, was over. The official explanation was diplomatic. The halt was intended to facilitate peace negotiations with Hanoi, which had finally agreed to talks in Paris. But the truth was more complex and far more damning. Rolling Thunder had failed. Completely, utterly, and expensively. Consider the objectives. First, boost South Vietnamese morale. Initially, the bombing did provide a psychological boost, proof that America was committed. But as the war dragged on and South Vietnam's situation continued to deteriorate, morale collapsed regardless. The bombing became background noise, irrelevant to the grinding reality of the ground war. Second, halt infiltration of men and supplies into South Vietnam. This was the most measurable objective, and the most catastrophic failure. Despite dropping more than 860,000 tons of ordnance on North Vietnam and Laos, more than the entire Pacific theater in World War II, infiltration increased during Rolling Thunder. In 1965, approximately 35,000 tons of supplies and 12,000 soldiers moved down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. By 1967, those numbers had more than doubled. The North Vietnamese adapted faster than the Americans could innovate. For every truck destroyed, another was supplied by the Soviets or Chinese. For every bridge dropped, a ford or pontoon crossing replaced it. Third, compel North Vietnam to cease support for the Viet Cong and negotiate. This was the ultimate goal, the political objective that justified the entire campaign. It never came close to succeeding. The North Vietnamese never wavered. The bombing hardened their resolve. It gave Hanoi's propaganda machine powerful ammunition, images of destroyed villages, civilian casualties, and American imperialism. It unified the population behind the war effort. Far from breaking their will, rolling thunder strengthened it. The reasons for failure were numerous, but three stand out. First, the political constraints. By refusing to target the most strategic objectives, Haiphong Harbor, the Chinese rail lines, the MiG airfields, until late in the campaign, Washington allowed North Vietnam to wage war without fear of strategic collapse. Graduated response was a doctrine designed to signal restraint, but it communicated weakness and indecision. Second, the nature of the target. North Vietnam was not an industrial power dependent on centralized infrastructure. It was an agricultural society with a dispersed, resilient economy. There were few truly strategic targets. The DRV could endure enormous punishment because it had little to lose materially and everything to gain politically. Third, the strategic context. Rolling Thunder was fighting the wrong war. The decisive conflict was not in the skies over North Vietnam, it was in the villages and jungles of South Vietnam, where the Viet Cong insurgency was winning the population. Bombing the North did nothing to address the fundamental political and military failures in the South. The human cost was staggering. Over 900 American aircraft destroyed, over 800 airmen killed or captured, thousands more traumatized by the daily gauntlet of SAMs, AAA, and MiGs. For North Vietnam, the cost was even higher. Tens of thousands of civilians killed, infrastructure demolished, cities scarred. And it achieved nothing. The legacy of Rolling Thunder is a cautionary tale, a study in the limits of air power when divorced from clear strategy and political will. It demonstrated that technology alone cannot win wars. That bombing cannot substitute for coherent policy. That graduated escalation designed to avoid provocation can become a recipe for prolonged failure. And that an enemy willing to endure punishment, sacrifice, and death for a cause they believe in cannot be compelled through pain alone. The lessons were written in fire across the skies of North Vietnam. Some were learned. Many were ignored. And within 4 years, the United States would try again. Operation Linebacker in 1972, this time without the political constraints, finally mining Haiphong and striking the targets Rolling Thunder had avoided. Linebacker worked. But by then, the war was already lost. Not in the air, but in the streets of Saigon, the rice paddies of the Mekong, and the living rooms of America, where the will to continue had finally, irrevocably, broken. After 3.5 years and nearly 900 U.S. aircraft lost, Operation Rolling Thunder was halted in October 1968. It failed to break North Vietnam's will, failed to halt the flow of supplies south, and failed to bring Hanoi to the negotiating table. The campaign became a stark lesson in the limitations of air power when wielded under severe political constraints against a determined, resourceful enemy. It cost billions, inspired global condemnation, and deepened the American public's division over the war. Rolling Thunder stands as a testament to the tragic collision of military might and political caution, a powerful reminder that victory in modern conflict demands more than just overwhelming force. If you want to understand the monumental strategic challenges and the enduring debates of modern warfare, make sure you subscribe to History of Conflicts. Hit that notification bell and leave a comment below. We want to know, do you believe Operation Rolling Thunder could have achieved its goals if not for the political restrictions placed on target selection? Thanks for watching.